It's one thing to be reactive and wait for the business to come to you. It's another to be proactive and say, look, I already know how you operate. I know these are the things you already need. Yet I can be 2 steps ahead of you. So we were wondering, how could we do that?
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Teddy Bekele. Teddy is the Chief Technology Officer of Land O'Lakes, a roughly $17 billion revenue farm-owned cooperative. Teddy owns the traditional IT domain while also having a much broader purview, as he'll note in this conversation. He's an advanced operator of the product operating model, and he cuts against the grain when it comes to thinking about the mix of employees versus contractors to support technology. I look forward to covering all the above and more with him through this conversation. Teddy Bekele, welcome back to Technovation. It's great to see you today.
Well, thanks for having me, Peter. Forward to our conversation.
Likewise. Well, I would love to begin, Teddy, with kind of just an overview from your perspective of Land O'Lakes business and the constituent groups within the business that make up Land O'Lakes. Can you take a quick moment and share a bit about the company you've now been with for a little more than 11 years, now as a CTO for a little more than 6?
So Land O'Lakes business, it's a farmer-owned farm-to-fork cooperative. There are 4 lines of business within Land O'Lakes and 2 types of board members or stakeholders in the organization. One are a set of ag retailers and row crop farmers, and then the other side are dairy producers. Going through the business unit, our Winfield United business is a crop inputs business. So in that business, we buy seed, crop protection, plant nutrition products from large manufacturers such as Bayer, Syngenta, BASF. And then we would sell those products that we buy to our ag retailers, who then in turn sell them to the farmers. These ag retailers are cooperatives themselves, so they are on their board. They're made up of those row crop farmers that they serve. And we'll get into more about how that business works and how we add value into that whole ecosystem. The second business is our animal nutrition business. Goes with the Purina name. So we serve every species except for dog and cat in North America. So you can think of horses, chickens, dairy cows, beef cattle, goats, deer, you name the animal other than dog and cat. That's the predominant business. And we are a basic manufacturer in that situation, which means we buy raw ingredients like corn and soybeans, and we formulate them with minerals and vitamins and make up feed for all these different species. And that's sold either through those same ag retailers that Winfield United sells to, or to big box like Tractor Supply. And a number of other dealers that are thousands of dealers that are in the network. The third business is what most people know Land O'Lakes for, which is the dairy business. So that's where we buy the milk from the other side of our membership, which are these dairy producers. And then we either sell the milk in the open marketplace, or we turn into value-added products that is just butter and cheese that you and I would find in the store. And that's the business that's been around for over 100 years, and it's an iconic brand, and most people know it for the goods you buy in the store. And then the last business unit is the Truterra business, and it's a sustainability business. And it really has 2 aspects to it. One is looking at sustainability, which is the individual businesses that I previously mentioned. So, when you look at a row crop farmer, how can they farm in the most productive way, but at the same time in the most sustainable way? Every farmer wants to leave the land in a better place that they found it. And so they very much care about the soil, but at the same time, they can't go upside down on their financials. So what they want to do is give me some advice, give me the technology that helps me figure out how to make that equation work on both sides, meaning the productivity and the sustainability end of it. The other side that Truterra thinks about is the value chain. So our businesses are all connected. So, we plant seed into the ground, or we help farmers plant seed into the ground. It comes out, like I said earlier, one of the 2 major crops that are produced are corn and soybeans, which are the main ingredients for animal feed formulation. And so Purina would buy corn and soybeans, and then we would turn the number 1 species we feed in Purina is the dairy cows. So, and then those producers would buy that feed, feed their cows, and then obviously the butter and cheese you and I find in the store. So you sort of have that end-to-end value chain connection. So when we look at that, what are areas in which we could be more sustainable as a value chain? Not necessarily just one business unit, but the entire value chain. So it's not just Land O'Lakes. You can think of everybody else who is in that ecosystem. And we do work with all those various companies. And that's what that business is focused on. So those are the 4 lines of business that Land O'Lakes operates. They're independent, but yet very much connected with one another.
And Teddy, talk a bit about how your team aligns with each of those. There certainly are aspects of them that overlap, as you point out, and work in concert with one another. But also in your description, there's some significant fundamental differences in the way in which each of those parts of the greater business operate. Can you talk about how technology aligns with the different parts of the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Peter. I love that. And it's an evolution that we've had over the years. And so it started out, we used to be a very much traditional technology shop, which, we were centralized. So we had a PMO, we had capabilities around software development, web development, ERP implementations, sort of typical things you'd find in any IT organization. And our business units would come to us or in partnership, and they would say, I want you to work on this thing. I want you to implement a new ERP. I want you to develop a new system that helps us with managing our production. We would have an intake form. We would take that, and then we would estimate what it would cost, both with software and talent. And they would give them a bill back that says, here's how much it costs. And as long as they sign on the dotted line, we assemble the team and go. And then obviously once the project's done, we would throw it over the wall for support, and we would support it over time. So that's kind of how traditionally we've done things. And it's worked well from a cost optimization standpoint, working on the highest value, et cetera. But one of the things that was deficient for us is, as you said, these businesses are very unique, and there's a lot of domain knowledge that has to be built into even, it's one thing to be reactive and wait for the business to come to you. It's another to be proactive and say, look, I already know how you operate. I know these are the things you already need. Yet, I can be 2 steps ahead of you. So we were wondering, how could we do that? The other part was, as we rotate different projects, different individuals would go from one project to another. And so all that knowledge that was built during that period, during the project, would all be lost. And as soon as a person turnover, and then the next time we do the version 2 or the phase 2 or the phase 3, our partners would say, man, I have to re-educate you in our business all over again because the same individuals wouldn't show up. So we were trying to figure out a way to align ourselves better with the organization. That's where it was also the time in which Agile was becoming sort of the way to, I wouldn't say the way to operate. It was being experimented. This was about 4 years ago. And companies were thinking about that. And we said, is there a way for us to organize ourselves that way? So we really started to dig deep into it. We did a couple of experiments with a few teams. And then at some point, I believe it was January of 2021, we just ripped the Band-Aid and said, let's just go do this. And we created product teams that were aligned with our lines of business. I can show you what that looks like for us. So to exactly answer your question, you can see our lines of business at the top: Winfield United, dairy food, animal nutrition. Now, one of the things we found is we also have large corporate functions like supply chain that are centralized. So we need to create our product teams to be aligned to those functions as well. So these hexagons that you see up here are what we call product families. So each of the hexagons may have a couple of teams underneath it, but they are very much aligned to a business unit. So as an example, I'll pick out Winfield United at the top. We have a team focused on services and connections, team focused on omni-channel, an AI factory, and an operational team. And this would be made up of, we have folks like a product family manager and then several product owners underneath it, scrum masters, and then development teams that go along with it. So this is how we make sure that the individuals on these teams stay into these business units. They build some really good domain knowledge. And they're also at the seat at the table working with our business units to be able to define where are we going next, how are we going to, what's the next thing that's coming, and really flip to the model from going to that bring me the project to let's talk about how we go into 2-week sprints. Let's talk about what the needs are. And in a lot of cases, it's the technologists that have a little bit of foresight of seeing what's coming around the bend, and they are able to predict what's needed, and they can create their own backlog of things to work on.
Oh, I was just going to say, Teddy, I was going to ask, how were they defined? What was the process of, it makes a lot of sense, even as I'm running my kind of mental finger down the list. How long did it take to define these? What was the process that went from the old mode of working to this much more refined model that you've just described?
So it took us a little while to get there, right? At the beginning, we just almost looked at the collection of projects we had and said, look, if we have a collection of projects, do they neatly fit in some category? And if they fit into this category, there must be a need in this area. So that's the making of a product team. The other part was the applications themselves. So one of the things these teams do is not just work on new things, they're also responsible for existing applications. So part of what happened in our process, we had to blow up our support team. And the support team itself got blown up. And that didn't happen year 1. That happened on year 2. Because first we had to sort of get it organized. And as you imagine, there was a lot of tinkering. You put this here, oh, this actually capability goes over there. But then we assigned all this applications to a given one of those teams and said, you're responsible for these set of applications. So you're responsible for the maintenance. You're responsible for the day-to-day ongoing operations. You're responsible for the enhancement. And by the way, when you do your sprint planning, you can have a little bit of both. There's maybe some things that are day-to-day things to fix, along with some new capabilities we're building. So those two things together were really how we formed this. And that said, they're not static. Every year, as the business priorities shift, like it goes left and right. So as an example, a lot of the analytics before the whole AI explosion really were in each of those hexagons. So there was a data engineer and a data scientist of sorts in each of one of those teams that was more responsible for what we'd have called analytics, not just dashboards, et cetera, but maybe some of the advanced modeling and those types of capabilities. However, as things moved forward and the business is saying, no, look, we want analytics to be at the core of what we do, we actually have to create an analytics team that was really dedicated to working, and the use cases for analytics would come to that team. And they still work with all the other teams, but a dedicated team was needed for that. And that's really what we saw as we put this together. So there's obviously lots of benefits to the business. Calculating the ROI on the things they do is very easy because that's really what drives the prioritization of the backlog. The business teams, I would say, feel like these are their own teams and they have authority on which direction they want to take it, which is all great. But I think one of the things that I'm the happiest about, we just completed our employee survey. And in the last 3 years, one of the metrics that has gone really up for us, there's a question that we ask the employees of, do you see a correlation between your work and the company's goals and results? And that we used to be in a mid-60s favorability before. And, people were saying, well, indirectly, I can see it. We're in the high 80s now. I mean, people can clearly see working in this model, I know the work that I'm doing and how it's impacting the P&L of the business unit or the cost of the function. So that's really good to see. To me, that means we're getting the right traction there.
And how much of a cultural change was necessary for this new mode of work, Teddy? And maybe coupled with that, were there new kinds of team members that were necessary to bring onto the team who knew what good looked like from this perspective versus training people for new modes of work?
A couple of things there, Peter. One is, I would say, there was a little bit of what you could call decentralization of IT when you go to this model. So what's happening now is you have this very centralized technology team that knows a lot about tech, is very probably tight with one another, right? To sort of this teams that are local in a way. I mean, there is still a central team. We still have certain central capability teams, but a lot of local teams, let's call it that. And now they're working closely with the business unit or the function. Do they more see themselves part of that business unit and function rather than technology? So one of the cultural shifts was to make sure that although we were moving to a more distributed model, how do we stay connected with one another? How do we create our own identity? And so it's almost like, yes, you can wear the jersey of the team you're playing with, but your underneath shirt, it still says tech at the end of the day, right? And literally, this may be another area where I'll share something with you. We created a whole movement around kind of creating an identity for our technology organization. So we actually had a whole slogan called "We Make It Possible." I guess it's marketish, right? Because IT is in there. And we literally had T-shirts created and mugs. And even in the "It Possible," which is kind of IT, you could put, I make omni-channel possible. I make collaboration possible. I make efficiency possible. So people would wear that and they could even put whatever business unit or thing that they're working on in the middle. And so this was distributed, kind of creating that identity a little bit, right? And with that, we also had to sort of create what's our mission. We want to deliver technology, be a competitive advantage for employees, business, and our members. We even created a set of norms and expectations around connect, collaborate, and commit. We say, here's how we operate. So really trying to create that culture of we are one organization that is distributed, but we still identify ourselves as technologists, and our goal is to empower and deliver value to our business. And by the way, the communication has increased. COVID was helpful for that because we had gone from once a quarter meetings and then twice a year town halls to every other week. I still do every other week all hands meeting. which is recorded. And then one of the things we start out with is sort of these expectations and norms. And then we usually recognize somebody for living up to one of these values and what does that really mean, and explain that, sort of bring that to life a little bit. And then we get into sort of normal updates and the cadence. So staying connected as an organization was really critical for us. That really helped from that transitioning to this distributed, but we're still one, right? So we didn't want to swing the pendulum to be, oh, we're all centralized, to, oh no, we're a decentralized team, to more like, no, like we got to figure out how to keep everybody super connected. So that's one aspect of what we had to do to be able to make this work. The second piece to your question on, did you have to bring new talent in, et cetera? So we have about 255 full-time employees, but then still another 500 to 650 contractors, consultants, third parties that come and go. And that was done on purpose. That was part of the philosophy of, let's have people that are more in a leadership position. And then the actual doing, the arms and legs of the work is done by third parties, contractors, consultants. And part of the team is also a junior cohort, usually. So these are folks that call them in training, and we move them around those teams quite a bit. They have different roles, so they can then eventually learn a little bit of everything. So the idea of like going a mile wide and an inch deep. And so we opted to go down that route versus bringing new talent in from the outside. So how can we build from within this structure that we've set up? The reason we went that way is you should bring people from the outside, particularly in this Agile space. So as you can see, we're creating our own model of what Agile means. And we didn't want folks that, yes, they may have really good knowledge of Agile, but Agile done somewhere else or product management done somewhere else is different than kind of how we do it a little bit. So that was the key. It's like, okay, let's build that. And then, of course, we're not going to be 100% perfect, but let our own people decide what good looks like. And let's continue down that path and mature. So that's been the other sort of mindset shift, and from a talent development and a talent strategy that we had to put in place to make sure that this was working. And of course, the big part of making good alignment with the functions or business units is the relationship building. So keeping the same people there, and at least for a good period of time, was critical. And even when we move people around, it's not an immediate, okay, Friday, you're done with this team, go move to that team. It's usually like, it could be even 2 to 3 months, right? You're still on one team, you're starting to get acclimated to another. Because we work on this Agile fashion, they're able to, maybe plan a little bit less in the sprint, so the person is not burdened, because they also have to go to another team for a little while, and then make that smooth transition between when we do these talent transitions.
And as you think about the balance between the FTEs and the third parties you engage as well, are there ways in which you bring the third parties kind of into the culture of the organization itself? How do you think about that? I could imagine somebody who has a flipped model to your own that is much more biased towards FTEs over contractors, that they would worry about people that don't feel as much ownership or greater levels of attrition or other things that might be kind of the first things one might think about. And I wonder, how do you think about guarding against some of those to ensure that all the remarkable outcomes you've described actually come to fruition?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be frank, I mean, that's something we always struggle always, because you get, especially with some individuals that are really good. And, our team is like, we should really hire that person, right? Or they need to be on our team. And I feel awkward not to engage them in certain things because they're really part of the family now. So when we get to that spot, if it's really that valuable, we will bring that person on board. So we will make that conversion. And we've done several of those. But it's almost like, are we really a fit for you, and are you a fit for us? And my biggest thing is, okay, so this person comes in, I totally respect the expertise they bring. That's undoubted. If they've been on the team for over a year, I know you totally rely on them. But what's the next career adventure for this individual? Because just doing this, once they come into the organization, there's this concept of rotating, of trying different things, wanting to grow and learning something else. If they're like, no, I just want to do this thing and I'm an expert at it, well, then what you're doing right now works. So that's important. However, right up front, when we bring anybody on board, what's clear is, you're here for the expertise. And in fact, like in a lot of cases, you're not going to run into someone in our organization that knows that much more than you when it comes to CRM development and Salesforce, as an example. What we want to do is absorb as much knowledge from you as possible. So teach us, right? So we're looking to you to be the expert of this thing. What we want to do is learn as much as possible, and not necessarily the technology itself. That's obviously important, but also what have you seen in other organizations of do's and don'ts, right? Where do other organizations usually stub their toe or fall in their face? It's usually because we didn't enact certain process changes, right? Or we didn't put a certain type of culture in place, or we didn't incentivize the right way. And so a lot of these external parties that come in will have a lot of say on these types of things. So we respect them, and we know that they're there for the expertise they bring to the table, right? We're very mindful of that. And at the same time, we tell them, look, if there's a chance to be part of the organization and it feels like it's a really good fit for you, obviously that door is open. But at the same time, it's clear that this is the model we're working under. And so there's no ambiguity on it as we move forward. And then what I tell the team, it's, like that the idea to shrink and expand as you need, that's critical. You have to approach it with that simple mindset and that being top of mind for you.
And you've referred to the evolution to fusion teams. Can you talk a bit about the definition there and what that entails?
Absolutely. So as you saw in the diagram earlier, there was a couple of those hexagons that had a different color to them. Some of them were yellow and then the other couple were orange. So what we found is on the teams that have been doing Agile for quite some time and are quite embedded, and a lot of it happens to be in this artificial intelligence space, there is this, hey, we need to be further integrated. Like it's just, yes, having a technology product team is great. I love working with them, et cetera, but we need to augment the team with other subject matter experts that really know the business. And then together, we should form one team. We see that happen more and more. And that's where the idea of like, well, the leader is no longer a technology. Well, I'd love for it to be a technology person, but maybe it's somebody who's got the P&L responsibility. Maybe it's the marketing director. And so as the technology is becoming more embedded into the business, it makes less sense for it to be separate teams. So that's where these fusion teams are heading. Let me see if I can share one more thing before just talking generalities, get a little bit deeper on it. So a data and analytics space is one that really works well when it's organized that way. So this is kind of a lot of our philosophy around data and analytics. So what you have is again, you have those business units, right? And then we have these, you see those dotted lines go across. So that's data engineering. And then below it is data science. Then there's the visualization, which is what we call BI analyst. So there's a capability team that goes across. And then those teams that are inside, like, for example, Winfield United, those little dots, they're actually not just technology individuals, but business resources as well. And here's the example. If you double click, and I said there's more than one team inside of these hexagons. So you would have a value stream, and the green circles would be business resources, and the orange circles would be more of those technical resources. And then what we call the fusion team is this value stream. And so it now has a different name. And so just double clicking on that. So the value stream might be demand forecast to procurement, or procurement to net offer, or opportunity to execution. So these are those various value streams. And these teams now have, for example, in that procurement to net offer, there's a pricing specialist, 2 pricing specialists, there's 2 data scientists, 4 data engineers, 1 visualization person, and a scrum master. So that's the team now. And they're really, what they work on is, okay, how do we work with procurement team to then turn around, and when we offer contracts to our retailers, they're customized contracts, they do a lot of analytics on how to optimize the contract that fits best with that retailer. So that's kind of how that's organized, and just a double click into going further into that. So that procurement to net offer, like I said earlier, these things they're big rocks for those teams, right? So creating a good segmented offer, having AI is actually active ingredient, seed growth strategy, vendor incentive remodels, and grower financing, right? So these are actually, and the sprints are based off of the work around here. And it's not like a technology project. This is actual the business initiatives that's going forward, and these teams are delivering on that. So again, that what I talked about earlier, now that orange dot of the technologist is like, wait, I used to be assigned to a business unit, giving on a product team. Now I'm like in the business, like with the people I work with every day are like people that are in marketing and operations. Like, so am I a technologist? Like, what's going on? So having that connected tissue to keep that in place becomes super important. The other piece that I've seen, which has been a great evolution, is how now they feel like true leaders. Even an individual contributor that may not be a people leader, they're on the team. And if you're the lead data scientist, you are it. Like, you're the person who's supposed to educate everybody else in the team about what are we going to do when it comes to calculating that offer to that retailer for this contract. What kind of model should we use, and why are we going to use this model? And so their level of leadership on the team itself is becoming elevated, which is really exciting to see.
You talked a little bit about how it's not entirely distributed. There still are some central functions. Can you talk a bit about those parts of your organization that still are common across the different business units?
Yeah, absolutely. So even in that data science space, or data engineering is actually the best example that we would have. So we have engineers all over the place, and they deal with disparate data types. And the data that you deal with in crop inputs is completely different than what happens in animal nutrition. However, we do have a centralized data engineering team, and they have a couple of functions. Number one, we use a common platform, right? And so procuring the platform, curating the platform, making sure that it's up to date, if any updates need to be made to it, et cetera, configurations, et cetera. There is that platform team that's centralized that maintains that. Second thing, they also decide on the standards and guidelines on how to use the platform itself, and also what are some good practices to put in place. Now, what's interesting is that we have these guild concepts of a guild. So they set up a guild that maybe is a stronger communities of practice, right? So there's this group that comes together, but the guild lead is a person in the central team, but then the leads under that guild are the leads from the various product teams. They all together are defining what the standards and guidelines are. When we do deduplication, this is the process we're all going to follow for deduplication. Here's how it's going to go from this type of the technology platform into the data lake and into Snowflake, right? So, and these are the guidelines we will follow. So it's not like somebody centrally dictating how that happens. They actually all decide how this is going to work, but there's somebody centrally who's coordinating the discussion, who's bringing it up and making sure that if we have abnormal behavior or something is not working right, that's where it gets all coordinated. So that's the second piece they're responsible for. And then the third one is the talent side of it. So talent acquisition and talent rotation belongs to that, is the responsibility of that central team. So we have what's called the job family lead inside of these central teams. And then these job lead families, they know every single, in the case of data science, there's a data scientist in the organization, where they are in their maturity curve, what are their aspirations for each individual. So then we can say, okay, Susie's over here and she's ready to go work on this other thing. Maybe we'll move her over to dairy, but we got to make sure that like when we pull her out of here, who's going to be the backfill there? And how do we make sure that that person is trained up? How do we make sure that there's a smooth transition in between? And sometimes they themselves will step in to be able to be the sort of the glue in between the transitions, which is super interesting. Or somebody might say, I'm interested in, this had just happened in our animal nutrition business earlier this year. We're really interested in standing up a fusion AI factory. How do you put this team together, right? And what are the things, how do we organize ourselves and do the work? So the central team might actually play the role of that local team for a little bit, come in and say, this is how you do it. And then here's the resources we can put together for you, and then step back out and let them kind of go from there. So that's kind of how that magic works a little bit.
Yeah, fascinating. What a great overview that is. And I would love to maybe circle back, if you wouldn't mind, maybe providing a story or two across Winfield, animal nutrition, dairy, Trutera. Can you offer maybe a story or two or three about some of what you think is particularly special?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the Winfield side, I mean, that's probably the area, as you saw, there's like 5 AI teams, right? So they've been doing this for a little while now, but we have research plots across North America. There's about 115 of them. We've been doing it for 20 years. We gather all sorts of data about different varieties, how they perform in environmental type and the different environments, different soil conditions, different practices, et cetera. So that's one big set of data that we have. Another big set of data that we have is around transactions. So all our retailers will provide us data around who they've sold to, how much they sold to, et cetera. And they're all tied to marketing programs. So we have that input. Obviously, weather data and commodity data is something that's publicly available, large sets of data, but that's there now. And then the last piece is we do have also some data around operational. So a lot of farmers will provide us, here's the practices I employed on the field. Did I do till, no till? Or when did I apply my crops in the ground, et cetera? When you combine all that, you really start to get a good picture about the behavior of that farmer, their tendencies, what works best in a given region for them. And then also like, what's their interaction with their retailer? So you put that together and we can actually create really customized programs that would say to a given retailer, for the farmers you work with, we think this is the recipe that works best, right? In this order. So the combination of these products combined with this marketing program is what would make you the most successful in your area. And so we will provide that to them And then, as you saw, there was a team that creates a contract for them. So this program will be built into the contract that we put in place in front of that retailer. So therefore, they're executing that. And it's been great. I mean, we're bringing a solution to you that fits who you are and how you like to operate. And that's what analytics has been able to do. I mean, AI has been able to do for the teams. And it's really the combination of all these teams coming together to make that happen. And then you really surround it with the rest of the operations of the team. So that's what's happened as an example in the Winfield United space, which is very exciting. I'll give you another fun example in the dairy food space. So dairy foods, that's the butter and cheese and dairy products. So obviously selling to Walmart, Kroger, Publix, that's a big part of our business. There is a second part that's very interesting, maybe not as big volume-wise, but a really interesting segment for us, which is food service. So we sell the same butter and cheese in bigger quantities to restaurant operators. So when you and I go dine outside, it's the cheese that's used to come up with the product on the menu for any given restaurant. So now we don't have a huge sales staff, so we can't hit a whole bunch of restaurant owners. So we work through brokers. And these brokers usually have good relationships with small, medium, and large restaurant operators. And in the past, we would give them the products, give them the specs for our products, and they would go out and see whose door they knock onto, and then what kind of specials they can create for us. And usually, normally you go to the bigger chains first, right? Because you nail a contract, so you get bigger volume. However, we start taking into account, again, from a data standpoint, can you give us some of the transactional data of who you sold over the years? And then at the same time, we start to get profile of a lot of different restaurant operators throughout the country, even like who's growing more chains than who's not, even if it's just one restaurant and it's now spreading a little bit more, taking a look at their menus and the demographics of people that are coming to their restaurants. You put all that together and the teams worked on sort of this propensity, which are the operators who have higher propensity to buy this type of product from us because it fits who they are and it fits their menu and it fits their clientele. And then through some optimization, we actually put it in an order of these are the ones we want to tackle first, second, third, fourth, etc. By broker and give it back to those brokers. And again, and we started this in late 2021, and since then, I mean, we have gone up double digits. I mean, the hit rate of when our products would sort of we're around 11% or so of the target those brokers had, went all the way up to in the 60th percentile. And not only that, the margin we started to make on a per pound basis of cheese also went up drastically because now you're giving the right restaurant owner, the product that they want. To the point where it's also interesting to see the brokers coming and saying, can you actually give us recipes of stuff to make with the products? Because that's what the restaurant they would like to know how to even take the product and do something creative with it that you probably know more than they do because you work with your products every single day. So that's been a really interesting area as well. And that one that's worked really, really well. And now obviously people want to use it in a variety of different places. So that's another one that's more in that commercial space. And then Peter, the last one I'll give you is probably more on the supply chain side. We buy, and so for, like I said, animal feed, we buy a lot of corn and soybeans. That's the raw ingredients for the feeding formulations, but we buy a lot of corn and soybeans. And we actually have traders on staff, right? That trade the commodities. So sometimes they'll buy, because of the pricing is right, they'll buy in bigger quantities, they'll hold it, they'll sell it again, they might lock in a price in the future, et cetera. So working with them, the teams have built models to be able to predict where the market's going to go. Right now, again, there's a lot of publicly models and commodity houses use that a lot. What they don't have is the Winfield United data, which is how is the crop performing in season, what has sold versus what has not sold. And so we infuse that information as well. And we've kind of built models that the traders themselves are now using to be able to make better decisions. When to buy a commodity, when to hold the commodity, when to lock in a certain price and not. And, what they're learning now is instead of they used to use the model as an augmentation, it augmented their decision making, right? Okay, the model tells me this, but year 2024 does not look like year 2017, despite their similarities. So I still have to make a decision. But they're more and more starting to actually become modelers versus traders. So they're actually curating the model. And if the model's wrong, they will fix it and tell it why it's wrong and how to better it out. So that's a huge transformation. That's an exciting transformation to see. And that's where I think when Gen AI it becomes more prevalent, that's an area I think you have people that don't normally are not software developers or data scientists actually becoming more of that in the future.
Fascinating, really interesting. And as you think about the change you're describing and the opportunity this presents for more people to become modelers, the training necessary to build that muscle. Can you talk a bit about how you think about that as well? I can imagine that some of these modes of operation might be esoteric to some, of tremendous value once learned and implemented. Of course, what is the pathway from prior methods of doing things to this new mode? What does that entail?
That's the part about generative AI that I think we're not there yet. I mean, people think like, okay, overnight I'm going to become a software developer, right? Well, if you've never seen Python code, I'm not so sure. I mean, it will definitely write you Python code, but you don't know what is wrong and why something is happening a certain way. You really have to get into the guts of it, right? So spending time with somebody who actually is doing that is important. So this is where these teams become super critical because you're in this fusion team and you're sitting with someone that actually doesn't know how to write Python code. And they're starting to explain to you why the model is doing certain things versus not. And then if you want to modify it, well, where in the code would we modify this? Or in the training aspect of it, which aspect of the model should we train differently? Right? So it starts to get to the right answer. So I think that's the magic, is spending time with those who are working on it. But interestingly enough, that same modeler or data scientist or software developer is spending a lot of time with the trader. So guess what? They're learning the other side too, versus just, well, I don't know, the model just says this, but you're the expert, figure it out. When they're sitting together, it's like, well, no, I think this is what's happening. And I think this is the variable we're missing. Oh, we didn't realize that there's a shipment that didn't go right leaving Brazil's port, right? And that's why we didn't take that. That was never predicted in the forecast. So therefore, this is why we have a certain shortage of a crop. And that's why the prices spiked a little bit this way. Oh, well, how would we take that into account? Like, should we take a look at like news outlets? Like, how would a model take that into account in the future? And so that's kind of how together they would work on optimizing that. So now that said, as an enterprise, we still have to offer, and this is what we're doing from the Gen AI. I mean, each team is doing their interesting things, but from an enterprise standpoint, we still have to educate people on what it is, what it's not, give them access to things like Copilot. We don't restrict them from using ChatGPT or Gemini. Like, we still want you to go do that. Now, there's a policy, there's a little bit of a speed bump that tells you these are do's and don'ts when you go into the tool. We do a lot of training around that. But ultimately, I want people to learn what these things are and how they work, because nobody's going to be able to tell them how to make parts of their job or become more intelligent or more sophisticated in what they do today, other than the person who's doing it themselves, right? So best option is like go sit with someone who actually knows how to do this and like you guys work together. And then at the same time, there's some basic level of education that I can help you from an enterprise standpoint to get you to a certain level of proficiency.
That is very, very exciting and really interesting insights about the cross-pollination that happens at the intersection of the fusion teams and the ways that you've described now in a couple different ways. I really appreciate that, Teddy. I know kind of a related topic you and I've talked about off the record in the past that I'd love to pull into the record here is that you've noted that as you as a leader, now 6+ years in your current role, many more than that as a leader, more generally speaking, now more than ever, you're thinking and spending more time thinking about people and structures than about technology itself. And as the chief technology officer, that may seem like a paradox of a kind. I wonder if you'd share some insights as to why that's the case.
So the structure, as we talked quite a bit today, right? Like it matters a lot. Like, what are the right structures to put in place? You asked the right question earlier. How do you even define the team? Is it the right team? Is it not the right team? So you have sort of those dynamics, and how do you make it work so there's not friction between the teams, right? Even for a while we had that. So we had those local product teams and then this capability central team. I mean, I made it sounded all rosy. We're like, oh, look, this person in the middle manages all the talent and you can pull people around. at the beginning, it was not like that, right? I mean, there's a capability, which by the way, had lost all their resources to these local teams. So they're like, I'm a leader without people. And then you had the local teams going, the central team is putting out guidelines, but they don't know all the issues we deal with every day and the headaches that we have. So working on smoothing that out, like where are the frictions? How can we help them untangle that a little bit more? How do we have better collaboration between the teams? Part of it was kind of some of the culture work. But the other one is, the culture work, meaning don't be afraid. You can respectfully disagree, right? Say, you don't have to be antagonistic about it. Explain your problems, explain your issue, put that on the table. The other person goes, oh, I didn't realize you have to deal with that. Let's figure out how we do this. So that's the culture, the softer side of things. But then there's even just, you have to think about, is the structure itself set up in such a way that is not enabling them to collaborate better? What's preventing them from doing that, right? I know for a while we have a cloud team that helps you spin up the cloud environment, but they're the only ones that have keys to the kingdom. And the local teams were like there's a backlog, and I need to get this done like in the next 24 hours, not 3 weeks from now. And so, do we put cloud engineers on the teams themselves? Okay, do we lose a little bit of that if we do it, or not? Or is it still better for it to be central, in a way, and controlled, so we don't have big security issues? So those are the things from a structure perspective. And then as much as you try to put the structure in place and all that, you still have personalities, right? So not every product owner is the same. Not every tech lead is the same. Not every data scientist is the same. They all have their own quirkiness. And so it's also figuring out, you would be best if you go work with this team instead, right? So as you get to know people, right, and even looking at disk profiles and who's dominant versus not, and how do you create the right chemistry between teams so they actually work well with one another? And so that takes you to a whole nother space of starting to look at people and their personality, because that does have an impact. At the end of the day, you may have the best structure in place, but yet the personalities just clash and you go nowhere, right? It actually feels like it's not working.
Very, very interesting. I appreciate you sharing those insights as well. Fascinating to hear about some of the difficult work to get to where you need to be, but also the factors that have helped smooth that out as time has gone on as well. Certainly seems like it's been worth the journey. And I wonder, reflecting back to the beginning of our conversation, Teddy, a lot of what you put in place is these are big transformations. As you pointed out, it's even cultural changes, which in many ways can be some of the most difficult ones of all. And I wonder what advantages are there as a cooperative, as opposed to, let's say, a publicly traded company, to go through these kinds of changes and to be very intentional and to have a longer term perspective. Does that, have you had a chance to reflect on how this journey might be different if it were with a company that was making numbers every quarter and perhaps having a different sort of pressure than is possible within a cooperative? Or am I barking up the wrong tree?
Yeah, no, you're right there, Peter, and you're picking up something that's important. So for example, just a simplistic, if you're in a publicly traded company, quarter end matters, right? Land O'Lakes, I don't even know, it's we don't even think about quarters, right? Year end, yes, we operate more on an annual basis rather than quarters themselves. And that itself creates a different type of mindset, right? So you think a little bit longer term than you do more of the short term. Short term wins are important, but you're not sacrificing longer term benefits to hit a short term outcome. So that helps. That's one part of it. And even annual, talking about something that's 5 years long is normal in our organization. It's not something that oh my gosh, I'm not going to be here 5 years from now, because the idea is, well, some of these things have been around for 100 years. If you want to be here for 100 years, some things you put in place are going to stay there for a while. So how do we make sure that we're doing the right thing? And so we will embark on multi-year journeys, whether we're building even this model people we put in place. It's something that has to endure. And it took us, 3 or 4 years to get where we are. And we're still nowhere near perfect. We still have a lot of work to do. So, I can't imagine somebody coming in tomorrow and be like, okay, we're going to do it this way instead. The swing would be too high. And you wouldn't be able to see the maturity over time. The other piece I'd say is the mission-driven aspect of it. That's the big thing that cooperative brings. And you saw that even I'm pushing on, even the technology organization ought to have a mission. We need to have our own little why we belong here and the purpose. And that's because the people that are in the organization are here because of that. They love the purpose of the organization. That's what's rewarding every single day. that's what gets you to overcome all the challenges and little speed and noise you hear every day, because we're working towards a bigger thing. And so even us creating our own thing, it's like, okay, that helps for people to ground themselves. And ultimately, it's like, we're here to deliver benefits for our members, and the members are here to create a better world for all of us. Like I know it sounds like just motherhood and apple pie, but people, like, we really believe that. And so we operate under that umbrella.
There's a lot of dairy, a lot of milk and butter in that apple pie. So it's understandable you'd be thinking in that way. Well, Teddy, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you peeling back the onion so far in terms of the journey you're going through, the transformation you're leading, the fascinating ways you've thought about collaboration across a diverse and complex business like yours, and the long-term perspective, as you concluded here, the long-term perspective you're taking that's necessary to see change like this through a 100-year-old business that is planning to be around for another 100. Really appreciate, as always, you taking time with me.
Oh, absolutely. No, thank you, Peter. Appreciate the questions, and let me know if you have further questions. Happy to talk some more. So